As Alan's mentioned, the first part of this really is that we're delighted to be able to announce a strategic partnership between the NBS and CitA in terms of supporting Ireland's digital transformation. That's in a number of ways, in terms of BIM initiatives, potential knowledge sharing, and we had lots of ideas when we've met with Alan and Suzanne around that, of what the potential needs could be in the industry. But what we're keen to do is to start somewhere that we know well. And so the NBS has been producing industry surveys in the UK for well over 10 years now. And we're keen to do something really similar in the Irish market. So we're going to start with a construction technology survey and be able to understand really the state of the nation in terms of what technology gets used and the type of processes that you have in place already. And from that, we can then really begin to understand what training initiatives and different tools might be necessary to help you guys in the future. So that technology survey will have a look at some of the key processes and some of the key things that are on the horizon in terms of Internet of Things and artificial intelligence, and the things that might be actually in practice today, drones on site, cloud working, and so on. So we'll work to develop that and work with you and the CitA members to provide that. When we've done it before, we've seen that people are on a digital transition journey and that takes time. We're glad to see that nobody who's responded so far says that they've got it all sorted already. People are in a position of developing their own processes and their own works. So the rest of the session, I just want to be able to give you a bit of background to NBS and who we are. For those of you who don't know us, although we do have a number of organisations in Ireland who use us and use our products and services, understanding where this drive for change has come from, and also some more about our products, which you can also see on our stand today as well. So the first thing really is around information, and this was a quote from Bill Gates indicating that how you look after information, use information, and leverage it really differentiates you as an organization from others. That's what Microsoft did, that's what Google do now, and what future organizations in the construction industry are beginning to realize that we're part of this knowledge economy for construction. The NBS has been producing a specification platform in terms of paper-based and then into computing programs for over 40 years. But really, right from the beginning, we had this image of the specification being linked to the drawn information, to a bill of quantities, and to a library of technical information and standards. And that hasn't changed. What's changed is the technology, so that no longer is that about books and paper and form processes, but about moving all of that into the cloud with our new platform. That's very much where we're going. And you may also be aware that NBS used to be solely owned by the RIBA over in the UK, the Royal Institute of British Architects, but earlier this year we received private equity funding to really help with the growth of NBS and what we want to accomplish worldwide. For the reason behind this, in terms of construction and the processes that we're seeing, is the fact that not a great deal has changed in construction over many years. This is a quote from a great report from the World Economic Forum about shaping the future of construction that says, and this is for a large Canadian contractor, that he doesn't see much difference from when he started as an 18-year-old to when he's retiring as the chairman of that group. And then I was listening to the Code conference back in May of last year and heard this guy, Mark Andreessen, who was one of the former real founders of the Netscape and early internet browsers. And he said that where he wants to have the new opportunity is in slow growth sectors of the economy, including construction. And I thought, well, they're on to us. You know, these large investment organizations are beginning to see construction as a real place for potential disruption. And why is that? That's because the construction sector is really undigitized. So this is a McKinsey report, and you can see the types of organizations in bright green at the top that are the most digitized. Now, fair enough, of course, media and ICT, you could expect to be at the top of that list, but look at finance, where in terms of the work that's been done from checkbooks and huge ledgers through into ATMs and providing credit cards to chip and pin, and then into where we are now with Apple Pay or PayPal, and the ability to now look at fintech, blockchain, and all of the developments in finance. So that's an organization that had completely paper-based processes even 20, 30 years ago, and are now almost entirely digitized. And where's construction? Well, we're right at the bottom of that list. Only agriculture and hunting has less digitization in that industry. And it's at the bottom of that chart where people like Mark Andreessen are seeing the potential for disruption. Not only is that about the digitization, but it's about the fact that it's low productivity. So our inefficiencies, our lack of collaboration makes us a slow growth area. Not to mention that as a combination of those two, it's where we're least digitized that productivity is most reduced. And so even agriculture, where we've seen digitization isn't great, with investment, with collaboration, with moving technology forward, is still in a growth sector. And so what we need to try and do is to look at those two in combination and understand how we can further digitize and increase productivity in the construction industry. This report from McKinsey is well worth a read, and it has a number of strategies and suggestions about where those issues have come from, whether that's the high fragmentation, the lack of collaboration, and the lack of standards that appear across our industry. Here's a quote from a construction report saying that some key things that I'll pull out of here, that the necessary information that people need may not actually be provided efficiently on time, that the data that would actually help others do better in the industry, so collaborating and providing data to you or me doesn't happen enough, and that the construction industry is almost unique in the fact that little is known about how it actually gets run and the procurement routes that we are really using and what happens on site. And until there's more documented, it's very difficult to improve that. So I think you'd all agree that that is a pretty good indication of where the construction industry is now. The problem is that this is a report from 1965, and that in fact this was 50 years ago, people saying exactly the same things about the state of the construction industry then. So where do we go and how do we improve things? The World Economic Forum produced this report, an action plan to accelerate BIM in industry, and they have this thing called the BIM adoption wheel or circle, and it's broken down into three really good areas. The first is around the motivating factors. What's the benefit of BIM? What is the reason that actually you should invest in the outlay cost because there's a real value to what can be achieved later on? And those motivating factors have to be agreed by everybody and not just feel as if one person is taking the brunt of that cost. That then moves into collaboration. How do we then work better together as a result of those new technologies that we're implementing? What can we now achieve as a result of better sharing, better communication between us? And then once you've got that communication and those technologies in place, how do you then enable an entire industry to grow, evolve? And a lot of that is to do with the future of education and how we continue to train young people into our industry, improving equality and diversity, and improving health and safety, which includes mental health. So we need to continue to enable a more modern construction industry. Often, it's about speaking the same language, and that tends to not be the case, and we all tend to have different ways of looking at exactly the same subject. So what we really want to talk about is the ability to completely revolutionize the construction industry and not just gradual evolution, because that's what we've had for far too long. So it's how do we get that acceleration, that next step that will take us into the future. Where we've come from is this. This is a picture of Vindolanda in Northumberland. 2,000 years ago, we were building masonry walls, probably with a cavity, cement and mortar, on scaffolds, bit of underfloor heating. And what are we doing today? Exactly the same. Masonry walls, on scaffolds, cement and mortar, bit of underfloor heating. it's not saying that that technology is bad, but it's saying that we can do better. This analogy that gets used quite often by government now is that we're like the anthill mob in Wacky Races, if you're familiar with this cartoon, and that we're all heading in the right direction. We're all trying our best, we're putting in maximum effort, but we're not leveraging the technology that's around us, and we could do so much better than that. What we need to become is like a Formula One pit team, and that glorious ballet that you see between the engineers and the technicians, getting out of the way of other people, providing exactly what's needed in the most efficient way possible, and having it all planned and in place long before they need to execute it. What is the construction equivalent of putting 4 tires into a car in 2 seconds and refueling an entire tank of fuel? I think we know that it's about improving the off-site aspects of what we do. It's about mobilizing, it's about planning better so that we can execute as much clean work on site rather than the trades that we're used to. Back in 2010, the NBS provided a definition of BIM, and I think it stood up really well. We're pleased that this has been the case, that we understood that it was an information model. It wasn't just about geometry, it was about the information embedded in there. It wasn't just about one data source of a point of truth, but about multiple data sources coming together across a large stakeholder team. And that had to go right from the inception of an idea for a project right through to its recycling or demolition at a later date, and those materials and how they could be reused. But what happens in the future really is about this. It's about a digital twin, the ability to work the majority of the problems out in the digital world, and that includes the site access and all of the issues that crane swings and the like may cause. As much of that in the digital world as possible so that we don't have to do that work on site. And now, as we've seen with the UK mandate pushing through, that started realistically in 2009, 2008, and that's taking us through to 2025. So already you can see that it's a really long program that needs to be in place for real digitization of an industry to take place. And there's an understanding very much in terms of the people we've spoken to this week already that it's going to take time, and it is about what we can do to accelerate that process. Government stand to benefit from the Agenda 2. They have a huge portfolio of buildings, and in the UK that was 31%. In terms of Germany, they have 44% of construction projects, and in the US it's a staggering 57% of buildings can be tied, well, buildings and projects for infrastructure can be tied back to federal money. So significant improvements can be made in schools, in hospitals, in the public sector buildings that we work on, and in our roads and traffic infrastructure if we choose to accelerate these types of processes. As part of those surveys that I've talked about, we have a great deal of information about adoption of these technologies, and we can see how those progressed over time, and that's what we hope to do now in partnership with CitA for the Irish industry. The last part of the presentation from my perspective is to show you a bit of what NBS does and some of our products and services. As I say, we have the stand in the thoroughfare, and we'd be really glad to talk you through some of this. But fundamentally, it's about a combination of great data and great technical content alongside brilliant software that works seamlessly across a number of different platforms. So whether that's in terms of our BIM library, where we have an object library, the BIM toolkit, where we implemented that in terms of providing a plan of work of who does what when on a project, the geometry itself and how we link in with plugins, specification tools like NBS Create and NBS Chorus, and the standards and technical content that we have alongside that. So here's a couple of short videos. Here you can see the BIM toolkit. Again, this was a UK government-funded project which allowed us to look at the various requirements of a project at each stage of the plan of work. If you've worked with things like the job book in the past, it's a digitized version of those plans of work. But what it allowed us to do was to provide a tool that indicated who was responsible for a task and what the actual deliverables were alongside that. Some of you may know that the LOD, LOI level of detail, level of information required can be difficult to agree. So we provide indicative information around what is expected at each stage, both from a geometry point of view, but also in terms of the properties and the information behind the scenes as well. So you can see here those for a panel cubicle system. And then into specification tools, being able to provide structured data and a really clear process for how you develop a specification. So in this instance, we have a structured system outline clause. We develop relational database content. So it's no longer about paper processes. It's no longer about reusing old content without it being updated. We can provide things like updates to the standards in that technology and in that platform that allow people to work through the specification. And then to provide access to a library of manufacturers' content, which then can be replaced at the right stage to find the product that you're looking for. That's great in terms of having the specification developed, but then how do you keep that in sync with the model? Well, we do that through an association report and through our plugin, in this instance, into Autodesk Revit, but we've recently announced a partnership with Graphisoft and with other vendors too. But to show where those clashes appear between the spec and the model, and then fix those in real time. So being able to go in, look at something that's changed in one of those areas, and update the model to reflect the change, so that these annotations for ceramic tiles rather than the stone tiles that were there can be easily replaced and kept in sync. We then moved that into the cloud and looked at the Autodesk Forge Viewer, which some of you may be familiar with, which was a kind of open source way of looking at models, being able to then allow people to navigate through the spec using their model information. So clicking on an area of the model in that environment then allows them to see the specification information in read-only format in this instance. But this allowed clients, contractors, asset managers to be able to see exactly what had been specified in their projects, and that's part of the NBS BIM toolkit. And so where we're going next is with our newest product, NBS Chorus. And this is about taking all those lessons that we've learned from specification products and beginning to move those into the cloud. So this is a cloud-based specification knowledge management platform, all within the browser. And that structured data that you can expect from NBS is now available to all the people working on a project. So it's not a download that people have to access on their desktop. This is about having access into the cloud and having all of that structured data, so that as I begin to make changes, I can then push those live and work with other people on that specification at the same time. So on this project, you can see that my colleague Stephen signs in, but then there's another colleague, Alan, who might be working on a completely different device, and they are able to collaborate together. So by inviting somebody to that project, you can then begin to notify somebody else that you want them to contribute to that project. That could be within your organization, or it could be completely external to you. So in terms of that collaboration work, we're really excited about the possibilities of being able to work in specification terms, but in the cloud, on a wide platform. And we can also provide this in terms of new content areas that we've previously not supported before. We acquired a business in Canada and one in Australia, which has allowed us to now develop content for those markets as well. So you can see here, as we begin to develop the specification, it becomes locked down to just that user, but somebody else can have read-only access of that. The last part of this is to then look at how that develops into the geometry side. So now, rather than just having access to a version of the specification in read-only terms, instead they have live access into the actual platform itself, exactly the same way, through a browser. And we can begin to develop the specification for those who are more comfortable in a model environment. I think the two most fundamental parts are being able to have that digital plan of work that will help you to implement the BIM initiatives, and then using something like Uniclass 2015, our classification structure, to really indicate the types of sectors and areas that you need. But we're really excited to be working with CitA in partnership to help you through that process. Thank you very much.